So when I went to Kashmir, I told the corps commander, I said, when the battle occurs in Kashmir and then Kargil, I want to be with your troops where the firing is. I want to be where your humble, ordinary soldier is facing the flak. Only then will I realize what he goes through.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this very special broadcast on Mirror Now. It is 25 years to the Kargil War. And in the last 2 decades, we have seen many war accounts by journalists who covered the war and by veterans who had fought in the war. We have a new battle account this year. It is written by a journalist who was the first, actually, to enter the battlefield in Kargil. He was then working for the Indian Express. The book is called Flowers on a Kargil Cliff. I'm welcoming the author of the book, Vikram Jit Singh, to the studios. Thank you very much, Vikram Jit, for coming to us. Can I ask you, war is about blood, it is about gore, it is about loss, it is about grief, it is about mutilated bodies, it is about burying your brothers, your brothers in arms. Why did you decide to call the book Flowers on a Kargil Cliff?
Well, Shreya, I had grown up reading Western war correspondence and the tradition in the West of sending flowers from the battlefield to loved ones at home. So when Kargil broke out, since I went into battle twice at high altitude with the troops, at those heights there were very small flowers, alpine flowers, miniature flowers, which I would pick under fire and put them in my pocket and send them in letters to my very anxious and very worried fiancée in Chandigarh. And while I was doing that under fire, we were at 15,700 feet on the cliff where I nearly fell and we were under fire. These soldiers said, "Sir, ये आप क्या कर रहे हैं? युद्ध चल रहा है और आप फूल उठा रहे हैं." तो I said, my fiancée is worried. So if I send flowers, she'll be less worried. So soldiers who were with me, they also started picking flowers. And they said, "Sir, ये हिमानी जी के लिए हमारी तरफ से भेज देना." So it reflected that they were human beings who were caught in a lonesome battle and they remembered their loved ones at home. And when I mentioned my fiancée, they could associate with it. So it takes you from the odor of death to the very light and gentle fragrance of flowers and shows you the other side of war, the human side. So Flowers on a Kargil Cliff is about how under battle at 15,700 feet, I still think of flowers. And the soldiers understand. And that is the reason why I wanted to be a combat journalist, to be where the soldiers are firing and getting shot at.
You were the first journalist to enter the battlefield in Kargil. You went in with the first burst of fire, quite literally. At that point of time, as a journalist, did you think to yourself this could be a very dangerous proposition and situation?
Sure, before Kargil, I was in Kashmir. I was stationed in Srinagar. And I went on numerous counterinsurgency operations with the troops many times, including 3 days, 2 days, night ambushes, night assaults. So death was always there and fears were always there. It's not that you don't fear. I was a young man. I used to think, what will happen to me? If I don't die, maybe I'll lose a leg or an arm, and what will I do for the rest of my life? But then I had come to Kashmir and Kargil as a war correspondent. And that means to be where the firing is. So I told the corps commander, I said, when the firing occurs, I don't want to be with your commanding officer or your brigade commander or even your company commander. I want to be where your rifleman or sepoy is. And from there, I want to witness the battle and write about it, because that is the only way I will know what soldiers go through when the things get hot, or when the bullets actually start flying. So fear was always there, but I learned to control it and conquer it. That's the only thing.
You know, my reporting career spans about 20 years, yours much longer. As reporters, we see many things, we meet many people, we experience a lot of different things. But this was a war. I want to ask you whether there are moments from that period that are crystal clear in your memory, something you think you'll not forget till your dying day.
You see, I see war as a profoundly human experience, where what happens to you is so dramatic, has such a deep impact on you that, you know, you cannot imagine, because it leaves so much collateral damage. Now, the one face which haunts me is of a young Pakistani soldier who was lying dead at 15,700 feet outside his bunker, and I was witnessing his burial. So I took his photograph before he was zipped into his own sleeping bag and lowered into a battlefield makeshift grave. And there he lay to eternal sleep amongst those huge boulders which were like as big as cottages. Until today, 244 Pakistani soldiers lie on those forgotten faraway corners of Kargil, and their country doesn't claim them. Their relatives have no chance to claim their rotting remains. There will be no sense of final closure for those families. They can't say a prayer, they can't say a poem, they can't lay flowers at those graves. So just our soldiers came back home, whether in coffins, they were cremated in ancestral graveyards, their ashes went down the rivers, but those boys will never go home. And for me, that is something profoundly human. You know, what those 244 men and their families faced. And the families still face it.
And it was an act of decency and paying the ultimate respect to your enemy when you say, okay, this was someone we fought, this is someone we have killed, because you are doing it to protect your country, to fight for the honor of your flag. But now that you are dead, you're a soldier. You may be an enemy soldier, but you're a soldier. And the Indian Army did decide to bury the Pakistani soldiers that Pakistan had refused to claim. And as you say, their families will never get closure. You also write about love in the book. You also write about loss in the book. Because many, in fact, 85 to 90% of the soldiers and officers you met and interacted with in the war were all young men. 22, 24, 25, on the verge of getting married, engaged. Someone has just got married. What do you remember of them?
Well, they wrote letters back home whenever they got a chance, and they sent final letters home in case they didn't come back from the resort. But, you know, the story which stands out for me is Jintu Gugai and Anjana Prasha. And Jintu died in the war, and Anjana, who was an All India radio presenter, never wanted to marry because for her, he was the only man. Years later, she was persuaded against her will, and she married, whatever, she accepted marriage, and she had 2 children. And I say love has triumphed death because her daughter was born on November 21, which was also Jintu's birthday. And Jintu's father, Jintu was an Assamese boy, so his body was flown back. He's cremated in Assam. And his father said that, I want his ashes sent back to the battlefield and sprinkled at 16,400 feet where he died. So they flew his ashes back during the war, within a few days of the cremation. Lieutenant Rishi Singh of 17 Gadwal Rifles, a young officer whose tragic task was to sprinkle ashes as his first major task in the battle. He had just come from the academy. And he climbed to 16,400 feet, and there's Lieutenant Rishi Singh with a red urn in his hands and sprinkling Jintu's ashes on those hard, bold rocks of Kargil. And I've got that photograph of Rishi doing that. And I think for me, I think look at that young officer, what he went through. First task is to sprinkle ashes.
You also write about a Gurkha soldier who lost his life. Talk to us about that.
He was from the very famous battalion with the 111 Gurkha Rifles, Manoj Pandey's Rifles battalion. Bravest of the brave, because they've got one Ashok Chakra and one Paramvir Chakra. So only 6 units have one AC or one PVC, or 2 of them, at least one PVC, 6. So Lance Naik Dhanuraj Shrestha, in the beginning of the war, he disappeared during an attack at night. They couldn't find his body. They tried everywhere, and they searched for him. How? Not by seeing, by smelling, because they knew his body had decomposed, and they'll get his odor. But they couldn't find it. So they declared him missing, killed in action, and they went to his widow, and they said, he's missing and he's killed in action, and here is 60 lakh in compensation. And Tek Kumari Shrestha, his wife, 2 little children, 2 sets of parents, in-laws, and her own to support. Not a very good financial means. We have seen families squabble over compensation, at each other's throats. And Tek Kumari Shrestha, she said, I will not take this compensation because I don't believe my husband is dead. If he is dead, show me his body. Uski laash dikhao mujhe. So for 2 years, Tek Kumari Shrestha believed he was not dead, and he would come back to her and to her 2 little sons and the hearth that she had kept warm for him. And she kept applying sindoor, and her marriage bangles tinkled on her weary hands. 2 years after the war, a shepherd discovered a skeleton in a cave in Kargil, eaten by wild animals. On it were military boots which had a number. And they identified it as Dhanuraj Shrestha. So he was cremated at 14,000 feet in the battlefield, where the former battlefield. His ashes were collected, brought down, taken to Tek Kumari Shrestha, and handed over. And then that doughty, exemplary lady accepted that he was gone from her life, and she accepted the compensation due to the next of kin in case of killed in action.
So these are the layers, the insights, the human insights that come when a journalist who's witnessed the war, and more importantly, the soldiers who fought that war, is on the field noting down everything and then putting it out in a book. You also write about war animals and their contribution to Kargil. And you have a very interesting story put out in the book. Tell our viewers about that.
In the West, there is a great tradition of honoring each and every contribution to the war effort, whether it's a dog, a cat, or a donkey, or a nurse, or a support services. In India, I think we need to be better at it, not just talk about a few heroes. So during the war, now Kargil was a war which was fought at 18,000 feet. So you needed to get ammunition and supplies to 18,000 feet or 17,000 feet. The army regulation mules, the animal transport company mules, were not that good because they couldn't carry uneven loads. They were not good under shelling. They were not nimble-footed on the cliffs. But the Ladakhi donkeys, the small native donkeys, were brilliant. They knew how to hug a cliff. So there's one story I have of a brigade major who was going along an ice cliff, and he said he's going to die because it was too narrow. And then this little Ladakhi donkey stepped forward and went along the cliff. And he said, okay, if this guy can do it, I can do it. So he followed him, and he negotiated the cliff face. And not many people would know how Captain Manoj Pandey's Paramvir Chakra citation is written. During the war, there's this rigid staff officer bureaucracy, and they said, Citations must be written in a proper computer formatted, everything, citation, proper format. Now they are sitting in Yaldo, which is the middle of the battlefield.
Where do they get a computer from?
If they don't write the citations, the other battalions will race ahead of them and get the awards. So 111 Gurkha Rifles, Pandey's battalion, arranged for a computer, a diesel set, and a generator. On the roadhead on the Indus, it was mounted on 2 Ladakhi donkeys with 1 Ladakhi porter, very brave men, Ladakhi porters. And they marched 12 hours from the roadhead into the mountains where the TAC headquarters of the battalion was. Under a waterproof tent, a computer was set up and they wrote the gallantry citations. And Manoj Pandey and all his brave Gurkha guys got their due. And because of those donkeys.
Can I ask you this question?
I've also written about Captain Romel Akram because the Pakistani young officers were very brave. And he's an amazing guy. He fought alone against a concerted Indian assault on 5140, which is now Gun Hill, where Vikram Batra's Ye Dil Mange Wala slogan.
Ye Dil Mange More.
So Romel fought on that peak, and he got an Indian sniper round through his left cheek, exiting from his left ear. And he's got this massive scar down his left cheek. And it's like what? It's like the Prussian naked blade fencing scars of the late 19th and 20th century. If you look up Prussian fencing scars, it was huge, jagged, long scars. And that is his testimony of battle. He was decorated later by the Pakistani army. But courage knows no line of control.
I agree with you there. Can I ask you as a journalist, when you're in a war, there is the fog of war, first of all facts are not in your hands, or you don't see them immediately. There's also national interest. Are you always, as a journalist on the battlefront, a war correspondent, and you were the first, are you always in a position to tell the truth?
Certainly when the war is going on, you are not in a position to speak the entire truth because it goes against the morale of the army and the enemy can benefit from it. But I, as a journalist, I was embedded with the troops. But I'm not like the American embedded journalists. I have been critical of the army's higher command failings. So over the years, I have gone back to the war and taken up issues which merited attention, that they were failures of higher command, they were lacunae. That is why the Pakistanis invaded us over such a long frontier. And I've raised questions. There are certain things which I still have not put out in the public domain because they are far too sensitive. But I know them. So a way of putting war histories is by maybe not putting it down in black and white, but by raising questions and leaving the reader or the viewer to sense it, get a sense of the truth.
Vikram Jit, this was such a fascinating conversation. I have learnt a lot. I have read many books on Kargil. My father was in the war. But the conversation I've had with you has been so nuanced. There's so many details that I was unaware of. So thank you for the conversation and thank you for the book. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is called Flowers on a Kargil Cliff. If you found this conversation as interesting as I did, do pick it up. Vikram Jit, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.